Welcome back to It Depends, the podcast where we usually talk about sales tax and why the answer is so often, it just depends. Now, one of the industries that we work very closely with is the telecommunications industry. And telecom companies and the telecom industry has a whole different set of challenges outside of just sales tax. So in addition to sales tax, we're dealing with telecom taxes, regulatory fees, all of which are constantly changing. They're shifting. There's controversy around them. And one of the most relevant examples in what we're going to be talking about today is the Universal Service Fund, or what we generally refer to just as the USF. It's been a subject of recent debate, and there was even a recent Supreme Court decision that we'll talk about here momentarily. So now that the Supreme Court has spoken, the Universal Service Fund is not being dismantled or thrown into some type of disarray. So there's some goodness here. In a 6-3 ruling, which came out on June the 27th, so just a couple of months back, Supreme Court did uphold the USF framework and the FCC's oversight by USAC, rejecting broad non-delegation attacks. But there still remain a lot of questions that probably some of you have as well. What we're looking at currently, at least for Q3 of 25, from a contribution factor, is a 30% factor, which is obviously significant and can represent a significant part of the overall charge for telecommunications services. There's even thoughts, and some people are speculating that contribution factor could grow to over 39% in Q4 if the assessable base continues to shrink. So in the meantime, Consumers Research is back at the FCC. They're urging a 0% contribution factor, which is kind of strange, to really help encourage or elicit a response by Congress to really reevaluate how the USF fee is administered and what the contribution base should entail. So this episode of our podcast simply asks, what's next for the USF? But to answer that, I've invited one of our trusted partners to explain the legality and really dig into what's going on. So I'd like to introduce Jonathan Marashlian to the podcast. Personally, I've worked with Jonathan for about 15 years, maybe 20 years. In addition to working closely together, I consider Jonathan a friend of mine. I think he's got some great insight to share with us. So Jonathan, I'd like for you to please introduce yourself and we'll get started.
Sure, Brian, appreciate the introduction. And I think we go back 15 plus years. I know I've known your partner, Robert Dumas, since he was with his first compliance venture in Tax Partners. So we go way, way back. Really,
that's a good 20, 25 years probably.
Really aging ourselves. But yeah, I occupy a very unique position. With one hat, I am a full-time telecom lawyer. I've spent perhaps the majority of my career focused on communications fees. Of course, the Universal Service Fund is the biggest and mightiest of all. And also communications taxes is something that we've evolved into as the VoIP industry found itself in the crosshairs 10, 15 years ago. With the other hat, I am the founder of a compliance firm that focuses on, I'll steal your term of upsourced, not outsourced, but upsourced compliance for regulatory and corporate. So secretaries of state on the corporate and utility commissions, Federal Communications Commission, all the regulatory, and obviously the Universal Service Fund compliance is a big, big component of all of that.
So yeah, we've worked together, as Jonathan mentioned, quite a long time, and we often come together to provide, it's a little bit of a cliche, kind of the best of both worlds scenario, where we believe we each mutually focus in certain areas and have great skill and capability in different areas, meaning TaxConnex often will provide tax reporting and compliance services. Traditionally, more of the kind of collect and remit taxes that happen, through a billing system. And then Jonathan and his firm, as well as the compliance group, focus on these regulatory fees at the state level and, of course, at the federal level. So we really kind of combine to provide a full solution for telecommunications companies. So, Jonathan, with that as kind of the background, the introduction, why don't we start with kind of a basic question, just what is the USF?
Sure. So the Universal Service Fund, USF for short, is the federal mechanism that by statute implemented by the FCC and regulations in Section 254 of the Communications Act, basically keeps essential communication services, voice and broadband, making it available and affordable in hard to reach places in the country, underserved communities, rural. It's basically a program mandated by Congress, implemented by the FCC, and administered by USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company, that's designed to carry out the day-to-day administration of a handful of programs to subsidize and support the expansion and support and delivery of affordable communications and broadband services. Those programs include the High Cost Fund, which is supporting rural networks, the Lifeline program, which supports low income, making services affordable. There's the E-rate program, which subsidizes companies serving schools and libraries. And then there's the rural healthcare component of the program as well. In recent times, broadband has been a covered service, but broadband has not been a contributing service, meaning they do not, revenue from broadband services are not used to support these programs. Right now, and for the past, since 1998, the services that are, whose revenue is tapped for USF contributions are traditional telecommunications, both interstate and international, as well as interconnected voice over IP. So that is basically the background of what the USF is and what the USF surcharge is that customers see on their bills, that service providers that have to file their 499s, report revenue, are not obligated, but allowed to pass through to their customers so that they can recoup and pay their contributions. So just to be clear, Universal Service Fund contributions are not a tax. The Supreme Court decided that recently. And it's basically a regulatory fee that the carriers have to pay, but they are given the ability to recover them from their customers through a surcharge.
So would you say it sounds like it's more of it's a fee on the carrier themselves?
Correct.
Not necessarily what we would think of, to your point, a tax that is paid by the consumer. It's a fee imposed on the service provider.
That's exactly right. It's the reverse of what you would typically expect of a tax. A tax is owed by the purchaser, the consumer, and the retail provider. The last retail provider in the chain has the legal duty to be the collector for the government, whereas the Universal Service Fund is obligated to be paid by the carriers, the service providers themselves, and they have the option of passing it through. And of course, I'm not going to say universally, but most companies pass it through.
Sure. And Jonathan, you mentioned it earlier, in just for clarification, what's the interrelationship between the FCC, USAC, USF? It's all kind of tied together. We've got a lot of different letters floating around there. How does all that interact together?
So the FCC was charged, again, in the 1996 Telecom Act with making universal service in a competitive environment, one which is not cross-subsidized and opaque, meaning customers don't know that they're actually paying to support universal service, which is how it was handled when we had Ma Bell, AT&T monopoly. There was a lot of cross-subsidization going on, and consumers simply didn't know what their spend was being directed to. After the 96 Act, the FCC implemented the new provisions of Section 254, which mandated that they come up with a way of funding universal service in a way that's fair, equitable, and results in the consumers having knowledge of what they're supporting, or at least the carriers having knowledge of what they're supporting. So the FCC implemented the regulations. It's a big program, and as the FCC and federal government agencies often do, they'll stand up private or pseudo-private entities to administer the government programs, and that's what USAC is. USAC came into existence shortly after the rules were promulgated back in 1998. It's been around ever since. USAC is the fund administrator. So they are the ones that collect the contributions, and they're also responsible for allocating all the disbursements. So they have a big job. USAC started off as, I forget exactly what their annual budget was, but it wasn't significant. In more recent times, they've blown up to have a $500 million or more annual budget. So it is a big and some would say challenging pseudo-governmental entity to navigate. But ultimately, and this is something that we'll touch upon with the FCC versus Consumers Research case that was decided by the Supreme Court back in June. The challengers in that case sought to, allege that USAC violated a constitutional principle called the private non-delegation doctrine. That USAC was set up by the FCC to perform functions that Congress could only intend for the government agency to implement. And so, again, some would say that what USAC has done is doing the FCC's job for it, and that would be a possible violation of the private non-delegation doctrine and make it unconstitutional. But what USAC argued and what the court concluded was that because the FCC is set up as the arbiter and they are the decider and they ultimately make all of the final decisions, that it did not violate the private non-delegation doctrine. So the FCC's role in all of this is the FCC is supposed to set the regulations and the rules and the policies. USAC is simply there to administer and implement those. USAC doesn't have any independent authority. And again, that was a critical issue in the FCC v. Consumers Research Supreme Court decision from June.
Gotcha. I think that's a good summary in thinking about it in terms of, the FCC created the USF fund that then gets administered by USAC. That's my simplistic way to think about it and describe it. And
lawyers always have a way of creating 1,000 words for something that could have been said in 10. So good job, Brian. I
appreciate the background and the supporting information on it as well.
Yeah.
That's why we've got you here. So, taking a look at this a little bit more closely, I think you summarized, what the Supreme Court was looking at regarding the USF fund. Any specific conclusions we want to draw, or any specific kind of next wave challenges that we might expect to see as a result of this recent decision?
Yeah, so there's already, so the Supreme Court decision was clear, direct, but also narrow. as the Supreme Court often does, it's not going to render decisions on broad areas. It tries to keep its focus very narrow on the questions, the issues that were raised. So consumers research is not dead and gone. They're still around. I think earlier this month, or maybe late last month, when the FCC published its proposed third quarter contribution factor, consumers research was back at it. They filed and I forget what, a petition with the FCC saying, that for these remaining constitutional reasons, I think the big one was the major questions doctrine, that they are trying to tee up another court challenge. They've started the process. They've asked the FCC to reconsider and set the contribution factor at 0, basing it on the argument that the FCC in rendering these decisions is violating constitutional principle called the major questions doctrine. So I guess I could get into a little bit more of the specifics there, Brian.
Is the point of trying to implement a zero contribution factor just to specifically tee up a new challenge and additional debate? Because obviously,
yes,
that wouldn't be a sustainable factor to fund these different programs. But the intent is to bring people to the table to sort through this in more detail.
Yes, I'll try to avoid getting into the minds of consumers research or the big government, small government, anti-administrative state mindset. Again, I'll try to avoid that. The reality is a lot of that stuff is there. That's why they're doing this. They believe in the principles that they believe in, and they're seeking to find a pathway to make the current program something that either goes away completely or gets before Congress to the point where Congress has to do something to fundamentally reform the program. And they just don't like the FCC being as big as it is and running a program as big as this is. They want Congress to have more control over that program, again, just based on constitutional principles. So they're not going away. The only way this would end is if Congress does take action and clarifies and cleans up and really perfects the program for not just now, but the future. This is a program that's been around for, gosh, it's getting close to 30 years. And technologies have changed. Consumer behavior has changed. The way consumers are getting their information has changed. So much has changed in 30 years, and yet the basic statute on which this program is premised has not been altered in any way, shape, or form. So Congress needs to get into the game. And part of what consumers research may be trying to do is, yes, they'd certainly want the Supreme Court to come out and declare this whole damn thing unconstitutional. They'd love nothing more than that. Second best would be get Congress to step in and do something that at least appeases their concerns that this is the administrative state, the FCC, running amok and unchecked and having too much power to administer and dole out billions of dollars of disbursements while collecting billions of dollars of contributions from service providers and ultimately consumers.
I would think also part of why this has become such an issue in the recent history is what did the contribution factor start out as? If we go back to when this was first introduced, it wasn't 35%.
I think
It was single
it was
digits,
probably
wasn't it?
closer to 4%.
So I suspect that that's part of why this has gotten a lot of attention lately, is that the factor has gone up so much, probably to a large extent to some of the newer, let's say, technologies or ways of delivering the telecommunications services that don't fit into that 30-year-old definition of what accessible revenue is. Is that part of what's in play here?
It's a big part of it, but it's in addition to just the technological advancements and some types of communications not being subject to direct contribution on their retail revenue. By that, I mean communications that are integrated with software. Things like, well, I'm not sure if Skype is still around. I think Skype might have met its end recently, but services like so Google Voice, what we're doing right now, Teams, right there. There are lots and lots of services nowadays that did not exist 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I think I was paying 10 cents a minute for a long distance call. Consumers were paying anywhere from $20, $30, $40 a month for just basic local exchange service, where that local exchange service had a portion that was earmarked to the interstate bucket that contributed. So consumers have shifted how they communicate, and they've moved to services and solutions that do not contribute as much. Broadband is a big part of all of that. And so, again, we've gone from 3-4% to, I think the Q2 was, or Q3 was 36, and it's about to be 36.6, or I've got that reverse, 36.6 and 36. Anyhow, it's a 10x exponential increase in 30 years. And that is reflective of a 10x reduction in the contribution base of revenue that's tapped to support and subsidize the program. And like I said, a lot of this has to do with new technologies, but consumer use of those new technologies. The other big one is wireless, right? So we all have a wireless phone. Everybody's got an iPhone or an Android device. Well, if I'm paying $100 a month for that phone, that service plan, I'm not paying $100 of telecom revenue to the company providing me that service. Maybe 10%, 15%, somewhere in that range is allocated to voice. And of that, only the safe harbor or whatever traffic study, 37% is allocated to the interstate. So a very small percentage of the revenue consumers are spending on probably the single most prevalent communications mechanism today, your smartphones, isn't being considered part of that contribution base. And so you can see why, as consumer use and technologies have,
not the text and data piece of it, just the voice component.
Exactly.
Okay, so there seems to be, while this U.S. Supreme Court decision gave us some answers, there seem to be probably more questions on the horizon. What are some of those key open area questions? And then maybe part two to that is, I'm a telecommunications service provider. What should I do? Any advice for telecom service providers? So two-part question for you there.
Well, right now, I think a lot of the focus is on Congress and whether or not Congress is going to be able to come up with some type of legislative change that could get passed by both houses and signed by the president. Not an easy task. So, but we're now at a point where the Supreme Court has spoken. we're not at a place where there's concern that the program itself or USAC and its administration are going to be, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They're here. The program is here. It's not going anywhere. Neither is the contribution factor. It's not going down. It's still going up. So not a lot has changed other than we have greater certainty, and we know now that the decision that everybody's waiting for is going to have to come from Congress. And so what I mean by that is, what decision? Well, it could be we're going to expand the contribution base. We're going to add broadband. We're going to add edge providers. We're going to add, Facebook and Google and Netflix and all of these major users of broadband services. Congress can speak and pass a law that says your revenue is now going to be tapped and you're going to contribute and support broadband deployment and telecommunication services for all and at affordable rates. That's a possibility. Congress can do other things as well. We just don't know what Congress is going to do. So what do businesses need to do in the meantime? Well, you can't ignore your responsibility. The program's here. It's staying. It's still being enforced aggressively. We're seeing a lot of companies in the past couple of months get themselves cross with the FCC and with USAC because they're trying to comply with what their vendor partners are telling them they have to do for store-shaken robocall mitigation compliance. And part of the process is you've got to go get your certification authorization from iConnective, and you have to give them your filer ID, and you have to produce a copy of your 499A to show what revenue you've been reporting. Well, companies that haven't been registered and have been reporting, when they're threatened with the potential blocking of their calls if they don't do these things, companies are now finding themselves registering with USAC, disclosing that they've been in business for 5, 6, 7, 10 years or more. And you can imagine it's quite painful for those companies to find out that they are in a lot of hot water, owe a lot of late fees and penalties, and also have to now subject themselves to back filings of their 499As. It's messy. So one thing I would say is, if you're confronted with that situation, before you talk to USAC, before you file something on your own, talk to a professional. Understand what you're getting yourself into, because you're going to open Pandora's box and you might not like some of the surprises you see. And once you're on the radar, good luck getting off without the pound of flesh. So what businesses can also do? Okay, so if you're an established business and you've been complying, we still have a period of time ahead of us where this program's in place, and at 36% and rising, it's a significant cost to your customers. So what would I do if I'm in business? Well, I'm going to do everything I can within the law, as supported by my facts, to reduce my exposure of revenue to the contribution, to the fee. And there are many things that you can do. Everybody always jumps to, well, I can do a traffic study. Sure, you can do a traffic study. You can do a books and records, CDRs. You can do things to allocate between the interstate jurisdiction and the intrastate. But those things are obvious, right? There are other things. Companies offer services in bundles. They're packaging in software. They're packaging in information services and professional services. And some companies even have, maintenance plans that are baked into their price, alongside the voice, the VoIP, the wireless. So it's taking a close look at what you're creating as your product and what you're selling to the marketplace, and determining, can I allocate revenue from this, that, and the other thing to categories that are non-telecom? So that's something that I would highly recommend if you haven't, we call it optimizing your product catalog. If you haven't optimized it, you should do it, because this program isn't going anywhere. And a year, 2 years, potentially 3 years, that's a long time. That's a lifetime in this marketplace, in the communications marketplace. It's a long, long time to be in a poor competitive position against your competitors that are optimizing and can show their customers, look, below the tax and fee line, we're charging our customers 7, 8, 9%, 10%. This company over here, 30%, 25%. Customers start to notice those differences, and they start making buying decisions based not just on the retail price of the service, but the total package price of what they're paying with taxes and fees included.
Yeah, I think, taking this very complex scenario and breaking it down, I like what I've heard in terms of, at least in the near term, we're kind of dealing with the status quo. It sounds like the Supreme Court decision said we're cool as is, no changes, status quo. Status quo isn't what people want, so there's probably going to be some type of change, as you said, over a year, 2 years, 3 years. So at least in the near term, seems like there's a known set of rules that we're dealing with. And then certainly, to your point, looking at, is there a way to minimize that contribution factor, so that, or not necessarily the contribution factor, but what's exposed to the contribution factor, so that as a telecom service provider, I can be much more competitive in the market. I think those are really good takeaways. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your insight and your time here, Jonathan.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
So Jonathan, again, thank you so much for joining us and helping make sense of, what is a very complicated, complex topic. While the Supreme Court may have upheld the USF for now, we've definitely heard that the story is far from over. Whether that's, a year from now, 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, as we were talking earlier, there's probably some element of change that's going to happen in the future. And as you look at, telecom businesses, and especially companies that are providing VoIP services, the idea is that we need to stay vigilant. Keep your compliance processes tight. Look at being proactive about how you communicate fees and surcharges to your customers. As we referenced as well, potentially look at opportunities to minimize the exposure of your revenue to those contribution factors as they continue to rise, just so you can remain compliant. So over the next few years, we'll continue to watch how these developments unfold and really what they mean for the industry. And what I would encourage all of you to do, if you're not already connected with Jonathan on LinkedIn, definitely follow him. There's always a lot of good updates and information that Jonathan shares on LinkedIn. So I think that's a good resource for you moving forward. And as always, thank you for listening to It Depends. If you found the information, this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, share it with a colleague. Check out some of the additional resources from TaxConnex on our website, TaxConnex.com. A lot of good information there on managing not only telecom taxes, but also sales tax, and how to address and sort through the complexity of your compliance footprint. So until next time, hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.
This has been It Depends, with another episode explaining the complexities surrounding sales and use tax. See you next time.